Not everything is trauma. Not every argument is gaslighting. And not every time a child melts down, they are dysregulated. Over the past decade, we have soaked our family lives in this therapeutic language. But what if talking in psychology speak sometimes makes things worse? In this video, I'm going to show you how the words we use and the frameworks we think about our family with, things like diagnoses, labels, pathologizing, and pop psych trends, can sometimes actually hurt our marriages, our self-concept, and our children. So let's talk about 10 ways therapeutic language might be hurting your family culture. Welcome back to the show. I'm Avital. I'm the mother of 5. I'm the founder of HiFam. And I'm so happy and thrilled and honored to be on this journey with you, helping you to build the family life of your dreams, to create a family life that you love, to create family bliss. Basically, I'm here to help you to build a strong family culture. And if that sounds good, hit the subscribe, the like, the thumbs up, the notification bell, all the things to help me and to help you keep on building our family cultures. Today, I'm going to get into all things therapeutic language. And this is actually part of a series where we're going to break down therapeutic labels, diagnostic labels, pathologizing terms that people use in day-to-day language and understand what these actually mean in the literature, in the DSM, in the world of psychology and sometimes psychiatry, and what it means for the layman, for us, for amateurs, for just everyday parents, and why this is seeping into our culture, into every conversation that we have, and what the pitfalls, the downfalls, the dark side of that might be so that we can be aware of it. So first, let's just disclaim, because that's what we have to do these days, and say that therapy has its place. Therapeutic language is useful. I personally have benefited from therapy for myself, as a couple, for my kids. I am not against therapy. Some of my very closest friends and family members are therapists of all sorts. We have psychologists, we have social workers, we have physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists, all in my immediate family and close circle of friends. I have lots of couples therapists who are my friends and colleagues, and there is nothing wrong with therapy as the solution to some specific problems. But today we're going to talk about what is wrong with making everything into therapy. So let's start with number 1. The first reason you don't want to let therapeutic language seep into everything that you do, say, think, and interpret your children's behavior as is because it actually pathologizes normal human struggle. When you think in terms like gaslighting, like trauma, like narcissism, like dysregulation, like disorders or sensory issues, or all these different terms that have popped into our culture of late, sometimes you're going to label everyday challenges as disorders. Sometimes it's going to cause you to think of things that are actually within the realm of normal marriages, normal human behaviors, normal childhood development as something that actually is a danger rather than just a discomfort, something that's a disorder rather than just something that isn't your preference, or that's a challenge, or that's a day-to-day struggle. Often what used to be just part of growing up, of growing closer, of growing and developing ourselves now gets filed under the dysfunction. And that can actually cause us to stop trusting ourselves and to constantly feel like we're damaged goods. You see, it's true that most children go through a period of time where they find their labels too scratchy, where they want to wear pajamas all day, where they have massive, epic, explosive, and even aggressive tantrums, where they can't really be empathic and kind and see other people's needs, and they're just being really narcissistic and selfish in the way that normal, regularly developing children do. Now, if we are too well-versed, but not professional within our psychological training. In other words, we've learned all of these terms. We've learned all of the red flags to watch out for, and we've learned all of these symptoms to be on the lookout for. But we haven't also learned how to filter that through what normal childhood development looks like. Then we might be quick to rush to a diagnostic label and to a therapeutic track. We might be just taking things that are very normal, that are temperamental, that are situational, and labeling them as pathological. You might do this for yourself too. You know, if you've had hard news, if you've just lost your job, or you're living through geopolitical turmoil, or your mother just got a terrible diagnosis, then it's very normal for you to feel bluesy, for you to feel down, for you to feel sad for a while, or to grieve. That doesn't mean that you are depressed. If you're hearing something worrying, you might feel worried. And that's a normal, healthy human reaction to circumstance, to situation, to change, to news. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have an anxiety disorder. These types of labels often make us rush to them instead of considering that maybe this is just a normal reaction. It sometimes actually shadows and really overrides the fact of human reality. The fact of human life is that there is suffering, there is challenge, there is difficulty, there are developmental milestones, there are certain thresholds we have to overcome, there are situational crises in the world, there are difficulties. And not every difficulty is a diagnosis. Not every time that we have an emotional reaction or a difficulty with it, or that we're not succeeding at first, or that we go through a certain phase, especially as children, or even in our marriages, doesn't mean that we need to rush to a therapeutic solution. Sometimes we just need to toughen up and get through it. Sometimes we need to hone our skills. Sometimes we just need a little bit of time to process and to feel our feelings and to move on. Sometimes we need a chat with a really good friend or with a family member, or to get out in nature, or to get off our phones. So that's the first problem I have with this, is that it could lead us to just stop trusting ourselves completely. When we do that, it leads us to number 2, which is confirmation bias. If you have been planting seeds of therapeutic diagnostic languages in your head, then you might actually start to search for evidence for what you suspect. In other words, you think, oh, maybe my child has sensory processing disorder. Maybe my child is on the spectrum. Maybe my child has some kind of neurodivergence. Maybe my child is hyperactive. Maybe my husband is narcissistic. Maybe he's got some kind of personality disorder. He's avoidant. He has an insecure attachment. He's ambivalent. Maybe he's got a gambling addiction, right? All of these terms are really drawing from the well of therapy, of diagnosis, of mental health institutions, of the DSM, right? They're drawing from the world of pathologizing, of labeling, of categorizing all sorts of behaviors and feelings and moods and temperaments that can verge into the pathological, that can become an actual mental illness. But like we said earlier, in many cases, it's just part of normal life. People are sometimes selfish. People are sometimes lazy. People are sometimes aggravated. People sometimes get triggered. And even triggered is a psychological kind of term. And it's become so much part of our just day-to-day culture, right? Pop culture, that we use it really willy-nilly. And we're not thinking about the fact that we might be actually putting the horse before the cart. In other words, diagnosing someone, labeling someone in our mind. And this is where labeling does become disabling, right? There are times when labeling is helpful because it gets you the resources and the help and the clarity that you need about a certain situation. But many times labeling someone is disabling. Because if I've just decided that my kid is hyperactive, even though they're 3, and many 3-year-olds really are just, kind of wild and rambunctious and moving their bodies all the time and exploring the world. If I've decided that that's actually a diagnosis, they actually probably have a pathology, it's actually probably hyperactivity and maybe ADHD, etc., then I'm going to be constantly picking up evidence. I've actually skewed my brain now. I've put on a filter. I've put on glasses that are always going to be picking up pieces of evidence that support my prior. Now, if I was an actual professional and good therapist, then I would be able to balance that out with my understanding of normal childhood development. And I wouldn't be skewing all the time towards the pathology and towards the label, hopefully. But as a parent, I might just have a subconscious decision that I've labeled my child as, say, hyperactive. And now I'm going to collect the evidence and I'm going to dismiss all the times that my child sits nicely and focuses, all the times that my child is able to regulate themselves, all the ways that my child is actually calm and in control. And I'm going to continue to double down and snowball this vicious cycle of supporting my prior subconscious decision that my child has this label. Leading on from that is number 3, which is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I have confirmation bias for my subconscious prior, I am now going to start treating my child, myself, my marriage as though we have this particular issue, as though it's already been determined, it's already been diagnosed, it's already been set in stone. And I might even have a fixed mindset about this. Remember Carol Dweck's differentiation between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is one that says that we can overcome, that this is a challenge to actually meet, to grow into, that we can change, that we can expand and improve ourselves. And a fixed mindset sees those labels as kind of deterministic, right? They are destiny in some sense. They have fixed us in place and now we're stuck behind that label. And when we have that, pathologizing language that we just throw out there, and then we have confirmation bias, we can then actually start to treat people or ourselves like a problem. And when you treat someone like a problem, they often become one. So the problem is that if I see, say, my marriage as toxic, whatever that might mean, if I think my husband is abusive because I've just put that label on him and now I'm reading all of his micro facial expressions and body language and words through that red flag search, right? I searched for the red flag. I decided it was abuse. It's emotional abuse. Now everything he says to me, like, oh, you didn't load the dishwasher properly, right? I'm going to now interpret that through my confirmation bias as, yes, indeed, here, you see, he is abusive. But worse, I'm going to treat him like he's abusive, right? And then I'm actually going to create more of that problem. I'm going to agitate it. I'm going to suggest it. And this is a very deep and subtle subconscious process that we do, but we can often do this to ourselves, to others, to our children. Now, there are children with autism. There are husbands who are abusive. There are people who have depression. These labels all mean something. There are cases in which, autism or abuse or gaslighting or any of these diagnostic labels are useful and appropriate, and you need to act upon them. And I'm not suggesting that we as laymen, as people who aren't psychologists or psychiatrists, cannot use this. I'm not doing an appeal to expertise, as it were, or authority, because I actually really believe that you could be your child's best psychologist, that you could be the best marriage counselor for yourself, that you could be your own best coach. I don't believe that we always need to outsource these things, and I'm going to talk about that more in the future. However, there is that danger for us as amateurs. And by the way, this danger exists, I guess, for the professionals as well, that when we are, subconsciously deciding and hooking on to a specific label, we're then collecting the evidence and then treating that person or that relationship as though it's already settled science. So if you decided that your child is oppositional, then every, independent act becomes a rebellion. If you've decided that your partner is emotionally unavailable, then every time he pauses before he responds to you, or every time he looks at his phone, it becomes proof. And that leads to us treating our relationships like clinical cases rather than living bonds and real, relationships. We'll get back to the show in just 1 minute. But before we do, let me ask you, when was the last time you got to get your work done, to get your housework done, to sip your coffee while it was hot, or even to shower alone when your little kids were home? Listen, if you have kids ages 0 to 9, I know just how challenging it can be to get through your to-do list every day or to get a moment of peace and quiet for yourself. That's because I have 5 kids myself. And through all the years of homeschooling them, of doing my housework, of building my business, of maintaining my sanity, I had to find a strategy that works to keep them entertained and happy in a guilt-free, screen-free way, and to allow me the time to actually run our household and life. So what was this big secret I discovered? Well, it's called independent play, and it's Mother Nature's gift to all children. That's right, all kids are designed to play independently. But the trouble is that in our modern day culture, both our parenting style and our household layout and even the types of toys we buy can sometimes be inadvertently sabotaging kids' natural instinct and urge and desire to play. And that's a shame, not only for us because they nag and they're clingy and it's difficult, but also for them because independent play is the way that children learn. Children develop social and emotional skills, physical development, fine and gross motor skills, academic skills, basically everything they need to grow into well-rounded, well-adjusted adults through play. It's fun, it's easy, and it's free. But most of our kids aren't really doing it. They're nagging for a screen or they're vying for adult attention all the time. Why? Well, that's exactly what you'll discover inside my course, Reclaim Play. Reclaim Play breaks down step by step exactly the small, easy, manageable changes that you need to make inside your home and in the way that you actually approach your child in order to entice and seduce them back into their natural skills of developing through independent play. When children play independently for hours a day, yes, you heard that right, hours a day, it is such a pleasure and a joy to see them immersed in a state of flow and learning. They enjoy it and we feel guilt-free because they're not glued to a screen. It doesn't cost us money to schedule a babysitter or hire a nanny, and it allows us to get the breathing room we need to show up as the best parents we can be to them. So grab your copy of Reclaim Play, and within 3 weeks, your child could be playing for hours a day. Find the link in the show notes or somewhere around this video. And now let's get back to the show. Number 4, we're better at diagnosis than we are at treatment. What do I mean by this? Well, the world of pop psychology really excels at naming problems, at agitating issues, at giving lists of symptoms and red flags, and always telling us what to look out for and what's wrong and why this is toxic and why that is bad and why this might mean something, right? But it often fails at telling us what to do about these issues, how to solve them. It often focuses on this kind of self-reflection, analysis paralysis, archaeological digs into our history, self-analytics, right? All the self-data world. And knowing these things, like I might notice that my child is sensory seeking, but that is meaningless unless there's something I can do about it, unless it offers me more empathy, more understanding, a path towards helping and meeting those needs and growing out of some of those symptoms, right? It doesn't actually help us to become fluent in the language of dysfunction, but illiterate in the language of healing. I would much prefer pop psychology today if it was focused on problem solving, if it focused on ways to meet our children's needs, our marriage's needs, our own needs, if it focused on communication skills, on structuring our lifestyle and our habits in a way that actually supports mental health, right? I think that would be really useful. But what I've noticed is that so much of the content is actually just focused on analysis and on noticing things that are wrong. Now, I think there is a good side of being aware of red flags, of personality disorders, of abusive or toxic behaviors, or of diagnostic labels that our children might need. Of course, we all need to be basically educated and aware of these things. But having it always at the forefront of our minds, every teacher's meeting, every blog post, every video on YouTube, every movie, the books that we read, the library, everyone is kind of putting to the front and center and platforming mental health in a way that I think is actually sending us on too many wild goose chases. We're not going to find what we need to find because in most cases it isn't there. And when it is there, that's when we need the real professional help. That's where, yes, early intervention helps. That's where labeling becomes useful and liberating rather than disabling. But in many cases, it's going to actually be crippling. It's going to waste our time and our energy and our attention on something that probably isn't even there. And even if it is there, there are things that we can do about it without all of that kind of therapeutic industrial complex behind us. Let's keep going. Number 5 is that when we're constantly obsessed with therapeutic language about our family, about you, your child, your marriage, that outsources your authority. Listen, I think that there's a place for expertise. I've already told you, many of the people I'm closest to, my mentors, my colleagues, people I myself have gone to as a patient are therapists, and there's a place for that. But I think it would be so much better if we treated therapy like we treat the rest of the medical world. You don't just go to surgery recreationally, I hope. You don't just go in for procedures. You don't take medications without being aware of the very real side effects that those things have. There is such a thing as iatrogenic harm. Abigail Shrier writes about this extensively in her book, Bad Therapy. I'll link it below. Basically, the idea is that every modem of healing, whether it's surgery, vaccinations, medications, alternative medicine, Eastern, Western, any type of medical intervention, including even massage, has symptoms, side effects, and risks attached. And that is also true for psychological intervention, for therapy, for talk therapy. Talk therapy has very powerful suggestibility. A therapist that isn't very skilled and isn't maybe trained in particular modems of therapy might actually agitate or increase the issue. They might pull couples further apart rather than bringing them closer together. They might make you more self-conscious or lack confidence or depressed or anxious rather than bolstering up your mindset and your sense of self. They might make your child feel like there's something wrong with them, like they need more and more interventions because they simply can't. And they might actually deflate them rather than help them to grow stronger. Those things happen in therapy all the time, which means that there is a risk attached. Now, therapists also help us. Therapists teach us to understand ourselves, to understand our history. There are many psychologists that I have learned so much from and that I really admire and that I'm friends with on a personal level. There are books on therapy that have taught me so much and helped me understand my history, my relationship in my marriage, with my children, with myself. And yet, there's also the downsides. And those are the sides that aren't so spoken about. Now, one of those downsides is that it's constantly detaching us from a simple self-knowledge, from a simple gut instinct, from our intuition. Now, that sounds a little bit woo-woo, but there's something to it. There's something to it in the world of medicine, in the world of education, and in the world of psychology. If we're always looking to the experts, if we're always deferring to the authorities, it can leave us feeling doubtful, second guessing ourselves, like we can't take a step forward or make a decision for our children or try an experiment in our marriage without getting that justification, that validation from someone with a PhD. It makes us constantly second guess ourselves. Like, do I set this boundary or is this repressive parenting? When your language becomes overly clinical, then your instincts get silenced. Your simple way of talking about kids, like you did 20 years ago, or like your mom did, or like your grandma did, is overridden by this politically correct, hyper vigilant, very aware, very fine tuned, very trendy way of expressing things. We can't just say a kid is acting out. We can't just say a kid is being a brat. We can't just say that we're having a big fight in our marriage or that we're feeling really down and sad today, because those seem primitive, like you're underdeveloped, like you're not evolved, like you don't understand the language. You're not of the moment. You don't get the zeitgeist if you're just talking in simple, plain terms about things that annoy you, things that you like in your child, things that you don't like in your child, things that you want to work on in your marriage, right? Unless you frame it up in a very therapeutic language, you might feel like you aren't smart enough, right? Like you're not of the intellectual elite. Number 6, overdiagnosing ourselves, our kids, and our marriage actually disempowers us. It actually makes us feel like there's something wrong with us all the time. If you keep platforming your child's sensitivities, their difficulties, their challenges, their temperamental quirks that are sometimes getting in the way of their social skills or of their performance, then they're likely to feel like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. Mom keeps talking about my disorder, about my diagnosis, about my medicine that I need to take, or the therapies that I need to go to, about my PT, about my OT, about my speech therapy. And they can actually feel this really disempowering feeling. Like, even if your child does answer all of the diagnostic criteria for something, like an anxiety disorder, say, if they hear you saying, my child has anxiety, right? As if that's just something they were born with and that's just a defining characteristic and the most interesting thing about them, and it takes up a lot of your time and your budget and your energy and your attention, then they can learn to see themselves as damaged, as broken, as having a problem, as a big burden to their family. That's that fixed mindset where we use a label and it just is kind of very disabling because it becomes part of their identity. We'll talk about that a little bit soon. But I would rather that it was phrased in a proactive, solutions oriented way rather than my child has anxiety, saying something like, my child is learning to face their fears. My daughter, for example, had a massive fear of dogs, and I refused to let her see herself as someone who is just petrified of dogs, as someone who has a dog phobia. Like, no, this is overcomable. This isn't who you are. This isn't a massive part of your identity. And even if you never overcame it, even if this was a DSM diagnosis, even if say you have something that we don't know how to cure yet, that still needs to be one of the least interesting things about you. It can't be your defining characteristic. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to identity soon. But basically, we need to radically shift the way we talk about these things away from diagnosis and pathologizing language and towards solutions-oriented, empowering language, right? We need to replace that fragility with strength, with a conversation of overcoming, with a conversation of, yep, this is the way I was born. This is the way I'm developing. This is what happened. This is something I'm challenging. This is certainly there. I'm not suggesting we ignore it. We don't need to suppress it. We don't need to pretend it doesn't exist. We don't need to be secretive about what the label is or what the diagnosis is, but we also don't need to massage it and inflate it and balloon it to take up all the space in the room. It's just one other fact about you. You have this color hair and this color eyes and this color skin. You're this height. You were born at this time in this place. You're this birth order. You're this religion. You're this nationality. You speak this language. And this is also a sensitivity about you. But also you love reading and you love your friends and you play guitar and you ride a bike. And there's all many, 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 many ways of, thinking about you. And specifically this diagnostic pathologizing thing should just be seen as one more thing on the list and something that has its benefits and it has its downsides, and we are working to overcome it, to work around it, to live with it, to live through it, to heal it, to manage it, to cope, depending on the level of diagnosis, but not making it this disempowering energy in their lives. Number 7 is that diagnostic language shuts down repair. It shuts down reconnection. When you use terms like toxic, gaslighting, trauma bonding to diagnose things that aren't really there, say in your marriage, it can really freeze the relationship. It has a suffocating effect when we put these labels on certain interactions in particular. Real relationships, real children, real adults need a lot of space for growth, for grace, for forgiveness, for repair, for messiness. But therapeutic language often labels particular moments, mistakes, behaviors, words as unforgivable, when actually they are repairable. Now, this is a point that's really near and dear to my heart. I've worked with thousands of couples, some of them very up close and in deep, very real, very long-term processes. And one of the things that I have seen is that change is possible, that people can, they don't always do this, but they can take accountability for their rough edges, for their unacceptable behaviors, for their toxic attributes, for their mistakes, for their horrible moments. And they can apologize, they can repair, they can adjust, work on it, change, and they can move on from it and have a beautiful relationship moving forward. I've seen children who have struggled with things that made it seem like they would never read or never walk or never have friends. But through help and support and with time, many of them moved on from those struggles, overcame them, and thrived. And so if you label something like you're toxic, you have a dysfunction, you have a disorder, then it's not always actually going to help that person. And it's not always going to leave any space for you to move on, for them to learn to grow and change. The truth is that especially when it comes to labels like toxicity, we're all toxic sometimes. We all sometimes are cruel or hostile or thoughtless or selfish or simply unkind or just really rude. Now, there are cases when people are repeat offenders, when people cross lines, red lines, when they're violent, and aggressive, and that's not going to be a relationship that can be repaired. That happens. Or it does happen that children get locked into a diagnosis, or that adults suffer a long-term chronic issue. Of course that happens, just like it happens in the physical world, it happens in the emotional and psychological world. But for the most part, if you're with people who are reasonably good people, they're not addicts, they're not mentally ill, they're not toxically, violently abusive, then people can grow and change, and forgiveness and grace and adaptability is actually called for. But the problem is that when we use therapeutic and diagnostic language, we often label a relationship as, say, unsafe, when in fact it is safe. It's just that it's gone through a rough time or a hard spot or someone made a mistake. So we have to be really careful about not throwing out totally repairable, high potential, high value relationships, or not throwing these labels on people who actually can overcome and can totally grow and move forward, when in fact the label itself might stunt that process of repair. Number 8, it turns illness into identity. We've already alluded to this before, but let me just say it really plainly. I think that any dysfunction, difficulty, a challenge, symptoms that your child has, that you have, that your marriage has, that your husband has, should not be turned into their main thing. It shouldn't be who they are. It should not become their personality. Don't turn a challenge, a dysfunction, or a difficulty into an identity. Don't turn a diagnosis into a personality. Make your child an HSP, a highly sensitive person, as if that's just now who they are. Don't turn your man into avoidant, because now that's just him. As I've said, labels can be useful, but when they become identities, they actually become cages that we're locked into. We lock ourselves into seeing people that way, and they get locked in seeing themselves that way. And people stop evolving because they're busy being defeated by their diagnosis. Now, what I'm saying here does not mean that the diagnosis isn't real. Someone really might have that diagnosis, and it might be a big one. It might be a big disability. It might be a very real part of their life that they need a lot of therapies for, a lot of medication for, a lot of support for. And still, I would encourage you not to perceive it as who they are. We've got to help our children, ourselves, our marriages, our husbands, everyone around us to develop identities that are based on our values, on what we believe, on who we want to be, who we aspire to be, who we uphold as our role models. What are those values that we're trying to strive towards? Our belief system, our worldview, the things that we care about passionately, the things that wake us up in the morning, the things we want to spend ourselves on, spend our time, our money, our energy on, that's who we are, right? How we show up in the world, the energy that we bring to people, the way that we treat others, the way that we treat things and time and the planet and ourselves. That's who we are. It's not some kind of symptom or diagnostic label. That might just be a sideshow, a part of who we are, something that we either embrace or that we cope and just live with. But we do not need to make that the main event. Why? Well, because of number 9, it encourages victim mindset. If you are constantly seeing things through a therapeutic lens, you're probably diagnosing everyone. You're diagnosing yourself, right? Oh, I have depression. I have anxiety. I'm a highly sensitive person. I have a sensory issue. You're diagnosing your child. Oh, my child is hyperactive. My child is oppositional. My child is defiant. My child is attention deficit. My child has dyslexia. My child has whatever other disorder. My child is neurodivergent. You're diagnosing your marriage. Oh, my marriage is avoidant. My marriage is ambivalent. My marriage is unsafe. My marriage is toxic. These diagnostic labels actually tend to make us feel like the world is happening to us. Why did God or the universe or luck just target me with all these horrible afflictions? Why am I always the victim of these illnesses? Rather than seeing that most of the time, most of these things are just normal human development, challenging phases that we go through in relationships, a cause for growth, for self-reflection, for strengthening our skills and our mindset, right? For becoming stronger individuals with a firmer backbone and broader shoulders and a bigger smile, for learning optimism and resilience. Rather than seeing that these are challenges for us to overcome, we tend to shrink away and to feel small, incapable, incompetent, and hard done by. Right? We stay stuck in our pity party because if there's a diagnostic label, what can we do about it? It just happened to us. Therapeutic labels can sometimes make us feel like the world is happening to us rather than giving us the agency, rather than actually giving us the tools to take ownership, to face it, to manage it, to rearrange, to rethink, to seek the help, to take the steps. Because growth really doesn't happen when blame is the only lens. If we're always finger pointing and saying it's because of the fill in the blank diagnosis that I can't do X, then we're going to stay small. We're going to stay incapable. We're going to hide behind our excuses. Listen, you might suffer from something very real. I know that I have. I had clinical PTSD for many, many years. But one of the things I always have to train myself to do is not to use that as an excuse, not to be avoidant, not to avoid my fears or not face challenges or give myself excuses why I'm small or incapable or anxious just because I have PTSD. That's not an excuse for anything. And it's not who I am. It's not my identity. It's just happens to be part of my life. It's something I cope with. Sometimes I embrace it. It has some silver linings. It's taught me empathy. It's taught me overcoming. It's strengthened my mindset. It's really given me a lot of tools because I've sought help for it. But again, it's just not a very interesting part about me. It's not what makes me who I am. It's a small piece of the general puzzle. If you have depression, if you have anxiety, and you need to really question whether you want to say, I have or I've suffered from, right? I've been challenged with, I'm overcoming, I'm facing, right? Language that helps us remember that this is just one little bump in the road or a big bump in the road that we need to contend with, that we need to face, that we need to overcome, and that we can overcome in one way or another. That doesn't mean you'll get healed, but it means you'll learn to live with it. You'll learn to make the most of it. You'll turn lemons into lemonade wherever you can. That's where growth happens. Sometimes the biggest fights we have in our marriages lead to the biggest breakthroughs and the greatest closeness. Sometimes a really difficult phase our child is going through actually leads to these kind of quantum leaps forward in their development. Sometimes we go through a rough spot only to emerge stronger and wiser. It's the cocoon to butterfly effect. And no, not every diagnosis leads to some amazing breakthrough at the end, but many have their silver linings. Maybe it increases our empathy, or it helps us to meet certain people, or opens career paths for us, or opportunities we wouldn't have had otherwise. Thus is the nature of loss, tragedy, grief, difficulty, is that it often has some kind of even small upside that we can look to. And it calls us to resilience and to growth rather than to the victim mindset. And finally, number 10, talking about your family through a therapeutic lens really undermines your family culture. Even if there are diagnostic labels in your family and you come by them honestly, and even if you are managing different therapeutic treatments, medical regimens, etc., what you don't want to do is make your family into this management system, into a coping mechanism, or turn yourselves into someone who's just making lists of symptoms and medications and therapeutic rabbit holes. Yeah, all of those things are going to be part of your life, but don't let that distract you from the main event, which is your family culture. Creating rituals, creating responsibilities, really sharing your values with the next generation. Building a home that reflects the love, the trust, the connection, the meaning that your relationships bring, and not making your relationships only pivot around diagnostic labels and problems and dysfunctions that you always need to therapeutically solve. Focus on what you believe in, on your North Star, on your values, on the energy that you give to your home, on your stories, your identities, your history, your ancestry, on what your home stands for. Focus on that, 10 times more than you focus on any diagnostic challenges that might rear their heads along the years. In the next video, I'm going to share with you diagnostic labels that we often use for kids and how we can flip those around and see them in a more empowering light so that we don't raise kids who have a victim mindset, but actually raise kids who see their challenges as something to overcome and to grow stronger from. Now, if this has spoken to you, make sure to leave me your comment below with which point spoke to you the most. What is your key takeaway from today? Writing it down not only helps me know what helps you so that I can keep making this content, but it also inspires others. And it helps you to cement those learnings in your brain and really remember them. Thank you so much for being with me here till the end. It means the world to me. And I very much hope that you have found this video empowering and encouraging. My goal is never to hurt your feelings or to offend anyone, but rather to open your eyes to new ways of thinking about things. But I know that you might completely disagree with my point of view, and that is fine. As long as you do so respectfully, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Keep on living that high fam life, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.